A very good morning to you, Melanie.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we've spoken to you about your book before, but goodness me, I mean, how prescient that was given where we are right now. Lots of developments since we've last spoke, and some of them obviously very fantastic. The return of those 20 living hostages held by Hamas. We've had the return now of, well, 7 hostages who their dead bodies, supposed to be 8, but one has been identified by the IDF as not one of the hostages that they were expecting. So once again, more lies from Hamas. Why are we surprised? But what did you make, just generally, since the first time I've spoken to you, since we had that incredible, ceasefire and the return of hostages? What do you make generally of the peace plan that Donald Trump has, at least tentatively at the start, put in place?
Well, the return of the 20 living hostages was an amazing thing. I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem. Yesterday was Simchat Torah, the festival on which 2 years ago the hostages were taken. And, we were all so overwhelmed, I think is the word. The emotions are running so high. But nevertheless, I was concerned and disturbed to hear President Trump, who deserves all credit for the return of the hostages. And, his reception here was adulatory, yes, and that was well-deserved. But nevertheless, he said many times, the war is over. And to us here in Israel, the war is not over because, first of all, we all knew that Hamas would renege on every condition that it possibly could. And that, there is a Trump's 20-point plan, which involves, among other things, the complete disarmament of Hamas. Hamas is saying that it won't disarm. Hamas, since the hostages were returned and since the peace plan came into effect, and since, therefore, the Israelis withdrew from parts of Gaza, the Hamas have been murdering significant numbers of their opponents.
And not on the quiet. I mean, they've been filmed openly in the streets with large crowds.
Indeed, and it's openly for a purpose. They are demonstrating they are still there. They have not been defeated. They are in control. Now, we'll see how that pans out. But the fact is, the war is not over. And President Trump has said in the last, I think, overnight, that he is not pleased. First of all, the Hamas have broken the condition of returning all the dead hostages. 7 have been returned. One was the 8th, as you say, was turns out not to be an Israeli at all. There was 27 or 28 of them are supposed to be returned. Yeah. There's a breach of that for a start. And the second point is that they have not disarmed and that they are killing people. And Trump has said they will be disarmed. Either they will voluntarily disarm or we will disarm them. Now, what does that mean? We don't know. But basically, it means that the war in real terms must continue until Trump's own conditions are met.
And the interesting thing, of course, is, when this was first announced at the White House with Netanyahu, Donald Trump made it very clear that, if Hamas don't agree and Hamas don't stick to the terms, then Israel can finish the job effectively. And this is the thing. It was so clear to me, and I've been to Israel and spoken to so many people and seen, how, obsession sounds like the wrong word, but just all-encompassing thought about the hostages who were being held for the people of Israel. Everybody knew somebody, everyone also knew somebody whose child is, or close relative is fighting in the IDF with mass conscription. That they were the joy at getting the hostages back, but also the joy at the prospect of peace from a war they did not start. And although we've seen scenes of jubilation and joy in Gaza, a lot of it has also been accompanied by, more chants of death to the Jews and the end of Israel. What a surprise. But the reality is, American, British or any other troops aren't going to be on the ground to defeat Hamas. It's still going to be up to Israel. And one of the other key conditions of this 20-point plan, not yet, probably never accepted by Hamas, is not just Hamas laying down their arms, but also, the acceptance of Israel's right to security, which Israel does not yet have.
Well, indeed. And one of the things that's been glossed over throughout this past terrible 2 years, not least glossed over by Israel itself, I think wrongly so, is the fact that the people who are at war, exterminatory war against Israel, are the Palestinians, the Palestinian leadership, the Palestinian Authority led by Mahmoud Abbas. Now, everyone knows about Hamas, but, the war against Israel is not prosecuted by Hamas alone. Hamas is the most extreme wing because it does not put on a suit and tie, and it does not pretend to be involved in the diplomatic game. It makes no bones about the fact that it's out to murder Jews, slaughter Israelis, and destroy Israel completely through military means. And the PA, the Palestinian Authority, led by Abbas, pretends otherwise. Yeah. But the fact is, it is one agenda, and that agenda is still very much on. And I'm afraid to say that, Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, in particular, are leading this sort of charge of a Palestine state. Yeah. I mean, they had the gall, Starmer had the gall to pretend that his recognition of a so-called Palestinian state, a complete fantasy, had something to do with the release of the hostages. Yes. On the contrary, as America and Israel repeatedly said, it had put back the release of the hostages. Now, he's still going on about this, and he will go on about this because, we can talk about this if you like, but it's a sort of an obsession of the Western liberal universalist elite represented by Starmer, that a Palestine state is the only way to solve the Arab-Israel war. Yeah. And this is based on a fundamental misconception. The misconception is the idea that this patch of land is being fought over by two peoples with a right to the land. It's not so. The only people with a legal, historical, and moral right to the land are the Jews, and the Palestinian cause for the past 100 years has been involved absolutely in trying to destroy the Jews' own claim to the land. So it's an exterminatory agenda. You don't solve a problem, which is basically a war of extermination, by compromising with the exterminators.
But also the opposite of compromise have come repeatedly. I mean, even Bill Clinton has been very, very clear, has been involved in the room. Take the deal. Take the deal. 4 times. Yes, Palestinian leaders have been offered pretty much every single thing they've asked for. And they have turned it down because their aim is not a Palestinian state. Their aim is a destruction of the Jewish state of Israel.
And to all these offers, Israel was in agreement, against its better judgment, against its own security, but it felt it had no choice. But it did actually agree to this. And as you say, it was turned down. So this, people in Israel are pretty clear of what they're up against here. Unfortunately, the West is not. And another thing that worries me about the Trump 20-point plan is that his whole kind of the day after peace agenda, which has many wonderful things in it. I mean, the idea that, that the Gulf states and the Arab and Muslim world should broadly be united in recognizing Israel and making the peace, putting aside the Palestinian issue, which would no longer dominate the agenda. That is a wonderful thing. But the worm in this particular apple is Qatar, the state of Qatar, which has always been an outlier as far as the other Gulf states are concerned. It's regarded as their enemy. Qatar is the Muslim Brotherhood. Qatar is the state that has funded and supported and sheltered and advised Hamas and is still doing so. And Qatar is the state which, as the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, is the state that's most involved with subverting the West itself in order to be taken over by Islam. And as we know, Qatar has bought up huge amounts of Britain and of America and bought very large numbers of some of the most senior players in those societies to this infernal end of taking it over for Islam. Now, how can Qatar be part of a solution long term?
And they've been treated throughout this as some sort of, a broker, as opposed to the people who were harbouring the leaders of the terrorists who attacked. And and again, this is not how we treated, you know, the Taliban when they harboured Al Qaeda back in 2001. It's not how any other country is expected to treat them. You talk about actually, you know, the long-term, you know, well, basically the tentacles of Islamist fascist extremism. I mean, you know, it's this ideology across the Middle East, but also how its tentacles have reached into not just Britain, but across Europe and in America, particularly in universities, on campuses. I would say in our media, particularly the BBC, but pretty much most of mainstream media, I think, across the board. I just want to play you a quick video. You've no doubt, I'm sure you've seen this. This is of Samuel Williams. He was an Oxford University student. And this is one of the chants that he led at the latest supposedly pro-Palestinian march last Saturday. Have a watch and a listen.
I don't want to yap for too long, but a chant that we've been workshopping in Oxford that maybe you guys want to join in. It goes, Gaza, Gaza, make us proud, put the Zios in the ground. Gaza, Gaza, make us proud, put the Zios in the ground. Gaza, Gaza, make us proud, put the Zios in the ground.
I mean, fairly typical of the sort of rather sad, pathetic, inadequate sort of incel, you know, hate mongers that we've seen in our streets. I'm sure you'll be pleased to know that in the last hour or so we learnt that not only is Samuel Williams of Balliol College, Oxford University, a PPE student, supposedly our brightest and best, is now under police investigation. He's also now been suspended by the University of Oxford, who condemn what he had to say pending that police investigation. Is this at least the start, do you think, Melanie Phillips, of perhaps us basically taking on the blatant, outrageous hatred and death threats on our streets from these supposedly virtue-signalling good people?
Forgive my note of weariness. I do hope so, but I suspect not. I mean, you know, this guy's suspension and investigation by the police is obviously very welcome. It comes after, you know, even by the standards of sluggish people who are slow to respond to this kind of thing, it produced absolute outrage. The boy was calling for the murder of countless Jews. Now, you know, that should have been dealt with immediately. The police should have been there immediately this was shown and arrested him for incitement to murder. And Oxford should have dismissed him, not just suspended him, thrown him out. Now, that's him, and that's a particularly extreme example. But unfortunately, although it's extreme, it's part of a trend in which we have seen, you know, in the demonstrations on the streets of Britain for the past 2 years, people calling for the extermination of Israel and the death of Jews. Now, the death of Jews has been often dressed up in Arabic chants, but everybody by now should know what they mean. And the police have done absolutely nothing. Yep. And behind all that, behind, you know, the British state standing back and saying it's free speech to incite the murder of Jews and the destruction of Israel, which are both crimes under English law. In addition to that, you have a situation in which this is against the backdrop of an entire, quote, human rights, close quote, humanitarian establishment, which has effectively turned mass murder into an issue of conscience. Yeah. This is the most terrible thing, that people are parading around, people of great ignorance, obviously, of the Middle East, great ignorance of Jews. Some of them may be, you know, innately prejudiced against Jews, but many of them are simply ignorant, and they're going along with a sort of fashionable crowd. Yeah. But you know, the humanitarian establishment, which people look to as the kind of arbiters of truth and justice and conscience, they have basically been painting the Israelis as not just wrong, not just behaving badly, but as evil, as demonic, people who deliberately cause the killing and starvation of babies, of children, of civilians. All of this is a lie, but put that to one side, the fact that it is a lie. it has incited people into the belief that the Israelis are fundamentally the most evil people in the world.
Yep.
Now, if you have that situation, it's not surprising that people are going to say, well, what do you do with people who are effectively Nazis? Well, that's what the Israeli Jews are being called. Yep. People who are evil, people who are demonic. You have to get rid of them. And so you have this innately, potentially murderous discourse, which has been framed as conscience and compassion and human rights.
And these are the good people. And again, and then when you have, a prime minister who allows his MPs, even some of his own ministers, to talk about, again, fake stories, fake claims about genocide and the like. And then you have 2 men murdered at a synagogue for being Jewish. This is it. Melanie, I'm final brief word, but I'm going to have to go to a break.
This is the most disgusting thing about Keir Starmer. Not only is he
among the many disgusting things about Keir Starmer,
this mythical state of Palestine, whose existence and hypothetical existence is only to destroy Israel, he has done nothing to say that the incitement against Jews and Israel is based on a lie, and consequently, he is complicit in this near pogrom atmosphere in Britain.
I absolutely agree. Melanie Phillips, columnist for The Times, author of The Builder's Stone, How Jews and Christians Built the West and Why Only They Can Save It.